Welcome to episode 74 of the Talking Fires podcast. Ben Fadden here, coming here on a Saturday. Wasn't expecting to do this episode, but coming to you just to react to this Adam Frazier trade that supposedly went down this morning, according to Jeff Passan. Adam Frazier, who was acquired by the Padres before the deadline last year from Pittsburgh, in a deal that involved prospects like Tucupita Marcano and others. Padres got Frazier, and he was supposed to be, a top of the lineup threat, gets on base, might help, with the versatility. He could play the outfield a little bit. They tried that. That didn't really work. He could play second base, which he did. But that kind of caused some type of rift in the clubhouse because Frazier plays second, and their best lineup, at least going at right after the trade, was Frazier at second, Cronenworth at first, and that meant that Hosmer spent more time not in the lineup, and that obviously probably caused some weird, just a weird vibe around the Padres because of that, because it didn't really seem at the time of the trade that it fit, but it looked like the Padres were getting a really good, hitting a really good hitter, because he hit over 300 with Pittsburgh in 2021 coming into the trade. But it didn't work out. His average severely went down. I think he hit one home run with the Padres, but that's not who he was. Like I said, the outfield experiment didn't really work. And it was just created more of a log jam on the right side of the infield at second and first. And now that Adam Frazier is traded, we'll get to more on what that means. But he is traded. The Padres traded him to the Seattle Mariners, him and his $7.5 million salary. In return, the Padres get Corey Rozier and Ray Kerr. Those both are prospects. Rozier has more of the high upside, so it looks like he could be the better or more impactful player at the big league level for the Padres. But Ray Kerr, he's closer to the big leagues right now. Ray Kerr, he's a left-handed reliever. He can hit up to 100 miles an hour. But the control was kind of a problem, as it seems from reports that I'm reading. And that kind of prevented him from being like major league ready or being identified as a major league prospect. But he did pitch a little bit better, I think like a 3.18 or a 3.81 ERA. In AAA last year in Tacoma. So he looks like he's closer to the big leagues than Rozier is. And he could very well, depending on how his spring training is, he could compete for a spot in the bullpen. But again, that's a long ways away, because we know with AJ Preller, he could make a lot of moves. He could make a lot of different things happen in the bullpen, relief help. They got to find a replacement for Mark Melancon, whether that's internally or externally. You gotta hope that Drew Pomeranz comes back healthy, but there's a lot of moving parts there. So that's a long ways away, but that's what you got with Ray Kerr. Corey Rozier, he is, like I mentioned, the more high upside guy. He was just drafted last year in the 12th round, so he's barely been in minor league baseball, in professional baseball. He did hit 380 last year, had an OPS over 1,000. So he did definitely have a good start to his minor league career. He's more of a speed type guy. Again, like I mentioned, 12th round selection. Last year he played in the Arizona Complex League and low A. So he's not facing, supreme minor league talent. Double A is pretty much the best, pure talent, because Triple A are more the ex major leaguers. Guys that are just there in case injuries happen. But again, Rozier is a left-handed hitter. He does have speed, so not a ton of power, but he looks like a hit for average Adam Frazier type bat. And so we'll see if he gets to the big leagues, how long he gets to the big leagues. Right now, it's impossible to imagine when he gets to the big leagues or to even forecast what role he would have for the Padres, because he's only played a season in the minor leagues, and he could get to the big leagues in 3 or 4 years and with Preller, the roster could look entirely different. So it's totally impossible to, imagine what Rozier will do for the Padres at the big league level in the future. But Kerr, because he's at AAA, because he's hits 100, he's more big league ready. So you could forecast him maybe as some type of maybe late season bullpen role, or just be in the bullpen right out of the gate. So that's what the Padres get from Seattle, those two prospects. And Adam Frazier, like I mentioned, you can go look at the episodes on YouTube and on the podcast. Jacob was really excited. I was really excited about the trade because Tucupita Marcano, right now in hindsight, maybe that hurts losing him, but he didn't have a ton of power. He didn't really have a spot because he didn't really play outfield. He was more of an infielder, and you already have Tatis at short. And at that time, you had Cronenworth at second base. So you didn't foresee a lot of playing time for Marcano. All the other guys, the prospects included there, we'll see what they, come into. I think Smolinski is one of them. We'll see what they turn into. So what they lost isn't that big of a deal, in that Pirates deal with Frazier, looking back at it. But, with that said, I think that it's still, obviously a disappointment because, the Padres were expecting big things out of Frazier. They're expecting him to get on base frequently, be that, high average type guy that he was in Pittsburgh, and that didn't happen. So it was disappointing. You have to think that it's disappointing if you're the Padres. And they're kind of just, trying to redo a trade here, because Frazier didn't really fit, like I mentioned. So they're just trying to, send him off and get something back because he didn't really fit. And right now, you weren't really sure what role he was going to have, because of Hosmer and the big contract. And if he still stays, you still think that they'd still have him at first base. If we're judging off of Frazier's production in a Padre uniform and Hosmer's production, it wasn't too far off because Frazier, again, he's not a power bat, and he just did not hit for average as well as he did in Pittsburgh. So I think it was just kind of a backtrack there move for the Padres here with this Mariners deal. Again, he didn't really fit, and what this means, and that's what I want to move on here, what this move really means for the Padres. Getting back to minor leaguers, not quite sure what production we'll see from them next year. Obviously, Ray Kerr is what we're looking at the big league level. If he comes up, you're not really sure what you're going to get out of them. But the big win here, the Mariners, Frazier could bounce back, could be a Ty France type thing where there's a little bit of a log jam at the position, and he's becomes a great impact player for the Mariners. And that probably will happen, to be quite honest. But for the Padres, the big plus for us is that it frees up $7.5 million. Last year, Frazier I think he was making less than $2 million for the Padres. Like the Padres had to account for that contract salary. This year, it's only like $7.5 million. It was more. It was actually $7.5 million. So that's a bigger hit on the Padres' payroll than it was last year. And so that $7.5 million is huge because, as you've heard if you listen to previous episodes, the Padres don't have a whole lot of room salary-wise in their payroll. Spotrac had them at like $185 million. So you take $7.5 million off of that, and now you're at around $178 million. So it just gives you more room to operate, which could be used and could be very useful when it comes to pitching in a few more $1 million to power hitting outfield bats, or starting pitching help, or relief help, or bench depth that the Padres need. Those are the needs this offseason. I think that $7.5 million could go a long way. Maybe that $7.5 million is designated for Tommy Pham and whatever money that they the Padres and Peter Seidler and Preller, they already had, categorized into what they're going to use for their limits for corner power hitting outfielders. They could use that. And the $7.5 million is purely towards Pham, bringing him back. If that happens, we'll see. But that $7.5 million, I think you could very well predict right now that that's going to be huge for the Padres in terms of flexibility and in terms of kind of opening up their options and maybe being able to spend more money than they would have thought, going into the offseason with Frazier on the team, obviously, and if they don't, trade a Hosmer contract or a Myers contract. Now, another thing that this brings, this trade, is that it brings clarity to the infield at the moment. You already have Manny Machado at third, Fernando Tatis Jr. at short, and now with Frazier gone, who is probably penciled in to play some innings at second base. Now Jake Cronenworth fills that position again, where he was an all-star last year, and where he played a majority of his innings. And now at first base, you put Hosmer back at first instead of, a first base bench hybrid role, or, having him have to be a DH or something if a universal DH comes after this probable lockout. So that right now it does bring clarity to the infield. But with that said, because AJ Preller is our general manager, I think that you're going to see this could actually open up more opportunities. Instead of having a log jam in the infield, Frazier gone, you got Cronenworth at second. You'd think that he's going to play second base. But at first now, if there is a universal DH, this could open up a lot of opportunities for the Padres. There's been a lot of fans, during the postseason, they wanted Freddie Freeman to come to the Padres, and of course I do. He's probably the best first baseman in the league right now. But the salaries just didn't really work, and that infield logjam didn't help either. But now, if there's a universal DH and you can't get rid of Hosmer's contract, you could. There's so many options you could go. You could go the first base route where you have Hosmer as the DH, and then you bring in a first baseman like an Anthony Rizzo, former Padre, by the way, or you bring in a Freddie Freeman. By the way, that is a very low probability of happening, probably not happening. But I'm just saying that is a scenario. You could forget just Rizzo and Freeman, the names, but just bringing in a better first baseman than Hosmer, who may be in a trade or something, is a possibility now if the universal DH comes through. If that's what they want, and Hosmer to be the DH or be on the bench, and they have, or the platoon, you have a first baseman that you can bring in. Or another avenue that you could do is the DH route. You could, just like normal now, you have clarity, first base, Hosmer moves back into, full-time first baseman at the moment. You could have him there, and then you have the DH spot open, and you could bring in a Nelson Cruz or a Kyle Schwarber, like we mentioned, or Jorge Soler, or Eddie Rosario, or someone like that, or Jock Peterson, like we mentioned on the last episode, episode 73, where you can go listen on Apple, Spotify. You can listen all those places. In that episode, we went through position player targets, outfielders, DHs, and Schwarber and Cruz were some of those DHs. And that's a scenario. If a universal DH comes up, that opens the opportunity for the Padres to bring him in, one of those guys in. Nelson Cruz seems like a great fit, and have Hosmer at first base. So that's a scenario. And like I mentioned, having Hosmer as a DH and having bringing in a better first baseman who plays better defense, that's a solution. Or you could have Profar play more first base, kind of like they did at the end of last year. I'm not saying that's the best. That's probably not a good scenario, but he does play better. It seemed like he played better defensively at first base than Hosmer did. And if that happens, then you could rely on Hassan Kim to be more of a defensive replacement late in games in the infield. And you could spend money on, bench outfield bats to use as pinch hitters so that Profar's not pinch hitting, he's at first. There's a lot of situations that this brings. I think that it's good because Frazier really made it a logjam in the infield. And it's frees the big win here that I don't know if a lot of people are going to talk about when they react or whatever, but freeing up $7.5 million is big for the Padres because that just opens up a lot of scenarios to add payroll and to bring in players that better suit their needs. So right now, I mean, you can't really say it's a win the trade for prospect wise because we just don't know what they're going to turn and what impact they're going to bring to the Padres at the big league level, which is what matters. But you can say it's a win in terms of creating more flexibility in moves that can happen. So that's the news for today on a Saturday. I hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend. Adam Frazier traded to the Mariners. In return, the Padres receive Corey Rozier, that outfielder, and Ray Kerr, the lefty that can hit up to 100 and might be in the Padres bullpen at some point next year. All right, this has been episode 74 of the Talking Friars podcast. We'll probably be back next week to discuss pitchers, free agent pitchers, and their possibilities. By the way, Mark Canha, who we also discussed on episode 73 is a target. He's with the Mets now, so that is not a possibility. So just keep an eye on these big league moves. And until next time, Ben Fadden here. Let's go Padres.